The bottle of expensive red wine tilted. A slow-motion disaster. It wasn't an accident. Across the table, Lachlan Reed retracted the foot he had deliberately stuck out to trip the waiter, a cruel smirk on his face. His joke had worked perfectly. A river of dark red bled down the front of the CEO's pristine white suit. A gasp echoed across the silent, opulent dining room, but it was drowned out by Lachlan's venomous voice. "You incompetent fool," he snarled, leaping to his feet. "Do you have any idea how much that suit costs? How much this wine costs?" The waiter, Michael Harlow, felt the blood drain from his face. His world narrowed to the spreading crimson stain and the furious face of the most powerful woman in the room, Evelyn Ellington. His job, his rent money, his ability to care for his sick daughter. It was all evaporating under the heat of 100 judging stares. The $600 he needed for Mia's next cardiology appointment, a sum he'd been painstakingly saving for 2 months, felt as distant as the moon. The crisp white shirt and black bow tie felt like a costume for a man playing the part of a failure, and the curtain was coming down hard. Lachlan wasn't finished. He reveled in the spotlight, his voice dripping with condescension for the benefit of the other board members. "This is the kind of service we get? This is what happens when you hire from the bottom of the barrel. I want him fired. I want him out of here right now." As Lachlan screamed for security to throw him out, Michael rushed forward with a napkin, his mind a maelstrom of panic. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry. I don't know how—" He was cut off as he dabbed uselessly at the silk, the fabric already hopelessly stained. But as he did, his thumb brushed against Evelyn's wrist, pushing aside the cuff of her jacket. His eyes caught something underneath, a medical alert bracelet. The symbol on it was tiny, obscure, a stylized image of a heart with a complex branching artery, an insignia known only to a handful of specialists in the world. To him, it was a thunderclap that silenced the entire world. His panic vanished. The restaurant, Lachlan's voice, the staring eyes, it all faded into a distant hum. The waiter receded, and 5 years of buried instinct roared to the surface. The knowledge he had tried to drown in cheap coffee and exhaustion broke through. He saw the faint blue tint to Evelyn's fingernails, the subtle tension in the muscles of her jaw that wasn't just anger, but chronic stress. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. He ignored Lachlan's fury. He ignored the 2 burly security guards who were now approaching the table with grim purpose. He leaned in close to Evelyn, his lips brushing her ear, and whispered a sentence that no one else could hear. The effect was instantaneous. Evelyn Ellington's eyes, which had been narrowed in cold fury, widened. Her face, a moment ago a mask of controlled anger, went pale with pure, unadulterated shock. The fury was gone, replaced by something else, a raw, stunning disbelief, and a flicker of impossible hope that trembled on her lips. She raised a hand, a sharp, imperious gesture that stopped the security guards in their tracks. It silenced the entire room. Lachlan, mid-rant, snapped his mouth shut, confused by the sudden shift in power. Her steely gaze was fixed on Michael, not as a CEO looking at a clumsy waiter, but as if she were seeing him for the very first time. What she said next, in a voice that cut through the tension like glass, sent a shockwave through the entire company. "You're not fired," she announced, her voice ringing with an authority that left no room for argument. "You're hired. Come with me. Now." The words hung in the air, electric and baffling. A confused murmur rippled through the dining room. Hired? For what? Spilling wine? Lachlan stared, his mouth agape, his face turning a shade of purple that clashed with his expensive tie. His perfect public execution had somehow morphed into a bizarre, private coronation, and he was left on the outside, utterly bewildered. Evelyn stood up, ignoring her ruined suit, her half-eaten dinner, and the stunned faces of her board members. She looked at Michael, her expression unreadable. "My office," she commanded, her voice lower now, for his ears only. Michael could only nod, his own mind reeling. He dropped the stained napkin onto a plate, his hands trembling not from fear anymore, but from the adrenaline of a ghost he thought he'd long since buried. He followed her as she turned and strode from the dining room, a queen leaving a chaotic court in her wake. He could feel Lachlan's hateful glare burning into his back, could hear the explosion of confused whispers erupting behind him. They walked in a deafening silence down a long, carpeted hallway, their footsteps muffled. The distant clatter of the restaurant faded, replaced by the low hum of the building's climate control. Evelyn didn't look at him. She walked with a purpose that seemed to pull the very air along with her, her pace brisk and urgent. Michael's heart hammered against his ribs. What had he done? He had broken the one rule he had set for himself 5 years ago. Stay invisible. She stopped at a pair of large oak doors at the end of the hall, pressing her thumb against a discreet panel on the wall. A soft click echoed in the silence, and she pushed the door open, holding it for him. He stepped inside. It was a vast, elegant office, with a floor-to-ceiling window that offered a glittering panorama of the city at night. But Michael didn't see the view. He only saw Evelyn as she closed the door behind them, the sound of the latch catching with a heavy finality. They were alone. The performance was over. She turned to face him, her arms crossed. The mask of the powerful CEO was gone. In its place was the face of a woman who was hanging on by a thread, her eyes shining with a terrifying mixture of desperation and demand. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice shaking with an emotion he couldn't quite place. "And what did you just say to me?" The silence in the office was a living thing, heavy and suffocating. Michael's throat was dry. He looked at the powerful woman before him, at the raw desperation in her eyes, and the carefully constructed walls of his anonymous life began to crumble. For 5 years, he had been a ghost, a man who clocked in, pushed a cart, and clocked out, his past a locked room he never visited. Now, this woman was holding the key. "I'm just a waiter," he said, his voice raspy, the lie tasting like ash in his mouth. "I must have misread the bracelet." "I'm sorry if I overstepped." Evelyn took a step closer, her gaze sharp enough to peel away the flimsy excuse. "Don't you dare lie to me," she whispered, her voice trembling with an intensity that made the hair on his arm stand up. "Not about this. You didn't misread anything. You looked at a symbol that has stumped dozens of the world's leading doctors, and you asked me, word for word, about aortic coarctation and its link to progressive subvalvular stenosis." She took a shaky breath, her composure cracking. "No one knows that." That secondary diagnosis, the stenosis, it was only confirmed last week in a private consultation in Switzerland. It's not in any public record. It's not anywhere. So I'm going to ask you again. Who are you? Michael's shoulders slumped in defeat. He couldn't fight this. The truth was a current, and it was pulling him under. "My name is Michael Harlow," he said, his voice barely audible. "And 5 years ago, I was a doctor." Evelyn's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of confirmation. "What kind of doctor?" "A pediatric cardiothoracic surgeon," he admitted. The words felt foreign, like describing a man he once knew. "My specialty was complex congenital defects." She sank into the plush leather chair behind her massive desk, her knees seeming to give way. "Grace," she said, her voice cracking on the name. "My daughter, the bracelet is for her. She's 11. She explained it then, not like a CEO delivering a report, but like a terrified mother confessing her deepest fear. She spoke of Grace's condition, putting the complex terms into painfully simple language. "The coarctation means the aorta, the main artery that carries blood from her heart to the rest of her body, is dangerously narrow," she said, her hands clenched in her lap. "Imagine a garden hose that's been pinched almost completely shut. Her heart has to work 10 times as hard just to keep her alive. And now, because of that pressure, a second problem has developed. The stenosis. It's a blockage, like a wall of scar tissue, growing just below the valve. It's closing off the only path the blood has left. Michael listened, his own heart aching with a familiar, clinical dread. He could picture the diagnostic images in his head, could see the turbulent, struggling flow of blood. It was a death sentence. They say it's inoperable, Evelyn continued, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. They can't fix the narrowing without making the blockage worse, and they can't clear the blockage without risking a catastrophic rupture in the artery. They've given her a year, maybe less. They sent us home with medication to keep her comfortable. The phrase hung in the air, a sterile, cruel euphemism for a slow death. Michael felt a ghost of a memory, the smell of a hospital room, the tired, sympathetic face of another doctor saying similar words about his own wife. He shoved the thought away, his fists clenching at his sides. "Why did you leave medicine?" Evelyn asked, her gaze piercing. "You were clearly brilliant." "Brilliance isn't enough," he said, a bitter edge to his voice. "My wife, she died of cancer 5 years ago. At the same time, there was an incident at the hospital. A colleague, a man I trusted, was falsifying research data. He was caught, and he needed a scapegoat. He buried me. He manufactured a paper trail that made it look like I was the one cutting corners, putting patients at risk. With my wife's illness, I was distracted, grieving. I didn't fight it. I didn't have the strength. By the time the dust settled, my reputation was destroyed, my license was suspended, and my wife was gone. I just walked away from it all." He looked out the window at the city lights, at a million lives that knew nothing of his own personal hell. "I had Mia to think of. My daughter. She needed a father, not a ghost haunting hospital hallways." Evelyn was silent for a long moment, processing it all. Then she leaned forward, her eyes locking onto his. "Before you left," she said, her voice careful, precise. "The research you were doing. What was it?" Michael's blood ran cold. He knew what she was asking. "It was a theory," he said, shaking his head. "A hypothetical procedure for treating exactly this kind of dual lesion defect. It involved a tissue-engineered graft, a way to rebuild the artery from the inside out while simultaneously bypassing the stenosis. It was radical, untested, but it could work," she pressed, standing up. "It's the only thing that could work. Grace's doctors say her case is one of a kind. They've never seen this combination of defects progress so aggressively." She walked around the desk and stood in front of him, the billionaire CEO replaced entirely by the desperate mother. "I will give you anything," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. "I will build you a lab. I will fund your research. I will clear your name. I will give you a blank check. Just help me. Help my little girl." The offer was a lifeline, a chance to reclaim the life that had been stolen from him. But all he felt was a suffocating, ice-cold terror. He saw the face of another child on an operating table, another set of monitors, another flicker of hope before the darkness. He had failed before. He couldn't bear the weight of failing again. Not with a child's life, not with this woman's last hope resting on his broken shoulders. He looked at her, his own eyes reflecting her pain, and he gave her the only answer his fear would allow. "No," he whispered, the word feeling like a betrayal. "I'm sorry. I can't. I'm not a surgeon anymore. That man died 5 years ago." The word "no" landed between them with the soft, dead weight of a shovelful of dirt. For a moment, Evelyn Ellington looked as if he had physically struck her. The hope that had illuminated her face just moments before flickered and died, leaving behind a cold, hard anger. "That man isn't dead," she said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous whisper. The desperate mother vanished, and the ruthless CIO returned. "He's a coward, hiding behind a waiter's uniform because he's too afraid to use the gift he was given. My daughter is fighting for every single breath she takes, and you're telling me you won't even try because you're scared? You don't have the right to be scared." "You don't understand," Michael said, his voice raw. "The weight of that hope, I can't carry it." Not again. Then don't, she shot back, her voice like ice. Carry the weight of my daughter's death instead. Carry that for the rest of your quiet, invisible life. She pointed toward the door. Get out. Michael didn't need to be told twice. He turned and walked out of the office, the heavy door clicking shut behind him, sealing him back into his own world. He walked down the silent, carpeted hallway, past the empty boardrooms and the million-dollar art on the walls, a ghost leaving a place he never belonged. He didn't take the main elevator. He used the service elevator at the end of the hall, the one that smelled faintly of bleach and floor wax. It felt more appropriate. The ride down was a descent back into reality. The gleaming tower gave way to a grimy lobby, and then to the cold, wind-swept street. The bus ride home was a blur of streetlights smearing across the dirty window. He was just another tired man in a cheap uniform, heading home after a long shift. The catastrophic, life-altering conversation that had taken place 40 floors above might as well have happened in another dimension. No one on this bus knew he had just held a dying child's last hope in his hands and let it go. He let himself into his small third-floor apartment as quietly as he could. The living room was dark, save for the glow of a small nightlight shaped like a star. He could hear the soft, steady breathing of his daughter, Mia, from her bedroom down the hall. He had expected her to be asleep hours ago. "Daddy?" Her small voice cut through the darkness. He turned to see her sitting on the old, worn-out couch, a blanket wrapped around her shoulders, her feet barely touching the floor. His heart clenched. "Mia, sweetie, what are you doing up?" "It's past midnight. I couldn't sleep," she said, her voice thick with drowsiness. "I was worried. Mrs. Gable from next door said she heard shouting at your work on the news. Michael's stomach dropped." Of course. A scene at a corporate gala involving a CEO like Evelyn Ellington would be gossip fodder. "It was nothing, baby. Just a misunderstanding. Everything's fine." He sat down beside her on the couch, the springs groaning in protest. She leaned against him, her small head finding the crook of his arm. He could feel the familiar, faint vibration in her chest, the tiny, imperfect rhythm of her heartbeat. A constant, terrifying reminder of the war being waged inside her. "Are you tired, Daddy?" she asked, her voice muffled by his shirt. "A little," he admitted, stroking her soft brown hair. He was more than tired. He was hollowed out. "Did you bring me a treasure?" It was their little game. Every night he would bring home a treasure from his shift, a fancy sugar packet, a unique bottle cap, a paper coaster with a cool logo. It was a small ritual that made his menial job feel like a grand adventure for her. Tonight, he had forgotten. His mind had been a million miles away. "Oh, sweetie, I'm so sorry," he started. But then his fingers brushed against something in his pocket. The pen. The cheap black ballpoint pen he'd used to take Evelyn's non-existent drink order. He pulled it out. "Tonight's treasure," he said, trying to inject some magic into his voice, "is a magic wand. It can write in any color you can imagine." Mia's eyes lit up in the dim light. "Wow," she breathed, taking the pen reverently in her small hands. "Even glitter." "Especially glitter," he said, his heart aching. He carried her back to her small bedroom, which was decorated with her colorful drawings and a galaxy of glow-in-the-dark stars on the ceiling. He tucked her into bed, her worn teddy bear beside her. As he did, he saw the small digital pulse oximeter on her nightstand, a piece of medical equipment that was as much a part of her childhood as any toy. He picked it up and gently clipped it onto her finger. He watched the small screen, his breath held until the numbers glowed back at him. 94%. Oxygen saturation, a little low, but stable. He let out the breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. This was his life now. A series of tiny, terrifying numbers on a screen. He kissed her forehead. "I love you, Moonbeam." "I love you too, Daddy," she whispered, her eyes already drifting shut. Just as he was about to turn away, she spoke again, her voice sleepy and small. "Do you think I'll ever get to go to a big party?" In a castle? The innocent question was a knife in his gut. He thought of the opulent dining room, of Evelyn's offer, a blank check, a lab, a chance. He was condemning his own daughter to a life of limitations because he was a coward. Evelyn was right. He stood by the door for a long time, watching his daughter sleep. He saw the faint blue tinge of her lips, a sign of the oxygen her heart struggled to deliver. He saw the future stretching before them, a narrow, cramped path of doctors' waiting rooms, mounting bills, and the constant, crushing fear that one day her brave little heart would just stop. Evelyn's words echoed in his head. Carry the weight of my daughter's death instead. He walked back into the living room and stood at the window, staring out at the brick wall of the building across the alley. He had one chance to save 2 children, and he had thrown it away. The weight of that decision felt heavier than any failure in his past. It felt like a fresh one, a failure that was happening right now in the suffocating silence of his tiny apartment. The next morning, sleep-deprived and on edge, Michael dropped Mia off at school. The guilt from the night before was a physical weight in his stomach. Every time he looked at his daughter's trusting face, he felt Evelyn's accusation. Coward. Are you okay, Daddy? Mia asked, her small hand clutching his. You look sad. Just tired, Moonbeam. He lied, forcing a smile as he knelt to hug her goodbye. You have a good day, okay? Be brave. Always, she chirped, and ran off to join her friends, her small backpack bouncing with an energy he wished he could bottle up. He watched until she disappeared inside the school building, the bravest person he had ever known. 20 miles away, in a glass and steel office overlooking the city, Lachlan Reed was not feeling brave. He was feeling humiliated, and that had curdled into a cold, calculated rage. The story was all over the company's internal chat boards. The waiter, the wine, and the CEO's bizarre reaction. He was a punchline. His attempt to assert dominance had made him look like a fool. He jabbed a button on his desk phone. Get me Peterson, he snapped. A moment later, a slick, eager man in his 40s appeared at the door. Peterson was Lachlan's bulldog, a private investigator who operated in the gray areas of corporate espionage. I have a name, Lachlan said, not bothering with pleasantries. He slid a piece of paper across his vast mahogany desk. Michael Harlow. He's a waiter at the Empyrean Club. I want to know everything. I want his credit score, his medical history, his elementary school report cards. I want to know if he's ever had a single unpaid parking ticket. Find out why a world-class surgeon is serving shrimp cocktails. There's a story there, and I want it. I don't care what it costs or what you have to do. Dig until you hit bone. Peterson picked up the paper, a predatory gleam in his eye. Consider it done, Mr. Reed. As Peterson left, Lachlan leaned back in his chair, a slow, venomous smile spreading across his face. He would not be upstaged by a waiter. He would find Michael Harlow's secrets, and he would use them to ruin him. And if Evelyn Ellington was collateral damage, so be it. At the Ellington Private Pediatric Wing of University Hospital, the smell of antiseptic was masked by the faint scent of lavender from a diffuser. Grace Ellington was not in a standard room, but a suite designed to look like a girl's bedroom, with pale pink walls and a window overlooking a garden. But the illusion was shattered by the bank of silent, blinking monitors next to her bed. Evelyn sat by her daughter's side, holding her frail hand. Grace was sketching in a notebook, her brow furrowed in concentration. She was drawing the rings of Saturn, her pencil strokes surprisingly steady. The Cassini division isn't really empty, you know, Grace said, her voice soft and a little breathless. It's just filled with particles that are darker than the other rings. People think it's a gap, but it's just hiding. Evelyn's heart ached. Her daughter, who could comprehend the complexities of planetary physics, was trapped in a body that was failing her. A moment later, Grace's doctor, a kind-faced man named Dr. Eris, appeared at the door, his expression grim. Evelyn gently squeezed her daughter's hand. I'll be right back, sweetie. I need to talk to the doctor about scheduling. She followed him out into the hallway, her stomach twisting into a knot. The telemetry readings from this morning are not good, Evelyn, Dr. Harris said, his voice low. The pressure gradient across the valve has increased by 10%. Her heart is weakening much faster than we anticipated. So, what does that mean? Evelyn asked, though she already knew the answer. Dr. Harris sighed, his gaze full of a sympathy she couldn't bear. It means our timeline is no longer a year. It's more like a few months. It's time we started to seriously discuss palliative options, making sure her time is as comfortable and pain-free as possible. The words hit her like a physical blow. Palliative. A word for the end. She felt the floor drop out from beneath her. No, she said, her voice shaking. I don't accept that. She turned and walked away, leaving the doctor standing in the silent, sterile hallway. She would not plan for her daughter's comfort. She would plan for her survival. When Michael arrived for his shift that evening, the atmosphere in the restaurant's staff area was thick with tension. His co-workers avoided his eyes. The spill was now the stuff of legend. He was halfway through polishing silverware when the restaurant manager, a perpetually stressed man named Mr. Dubois, beckoned him into his tiny, cluttered office. "Harlow, close the door," Dubois said, gesturing to a chair. Michael's heart sank. This was it. He was being fired. He had lasted less than a day after the incident. "Look, I don't know what happened last night," Dubois began, rubbing his temples. "And frankly, I don't want to know. But I got a call this morning. From Evelyn Ellington's executive assistant." He paused, looking at Michael as if he'd grown a second head. "I was given a direct, non-negotiable order. You are not to be terminated. You are not to be disciplined. In fact, you are to be given any scheduling accommodations you require, and you are to remain on the payroll indefinitely, whether you show up for your shifts or not. Do you have any idea what that means?" Michael stared at him, stunned into silence. It was a power play, a move so audacious he could almost admire it. She hadn't just offered him a blank check, she had bought the bank. He was trapped. She wouldn't let him run, and she wouldn't let him hide. He was her employee, in every sense of the word. He worked his shift in a daze, the ghost of her offer hanging over him. He was refilling a water glass when his phone buzzed in his pocket. He ignored it. It buzzed again. During a lull, he slipped into the quiet of the pantry and pulled it out. It was a text from an unknown number. There was no greeting, just a photo. It was a picture of a young girl, maybe 11, with intelligent brown eyes and a cascade of dark hair, lying in a hospital bed. She was pale and looked impossibly frail, but she was smiling at the camera, a small, brave smile. Beneath the photo there was a single line of text. "Her name is Grace. She asked the doctor if the man who spilled the wine could visit. She thought you were magic." Michael stared at the screen, the image of the smiling, fragile girl burning itself into his mind. The pantry around him, with its familiar smells of dry pasta and cleaning solution, felt like a cage. He was hiding in the dark while a child who thought he was magic, was dying in the light of a sterile hospital room. Magic. The word was a bitter joke. What magic did he possess? The magic of failure? The magic of running away? His own daughter, Mia, saw him the same way. She thought he could fix anything, from her broken toys to her broken heart. But he couldn't fix the one thing that mattered. He couldn't fix the tiny, flawed engine in her chest. He thought of his wife, Sarah, in her final days, the hope in her eyes, even when the science had given up. She had believed in him too, and he had failed her. He had traded his scalpel for a serving tray, his medical journals for order pads, all in a desperate attempt to outrun the ghosts of his failure. But the ghosts had found him. Evelyn's text was not an appeal. It was a mirror, and in it, he saw himself for what he had become. A man so consumed by his own past that he was willing to sacrifice another child's future. He was willing to let Grace Ellington become another ghost that would haunt him in the dark. He couldn't do it. The weight of his past failure was immense, but the weight of his future inaction suddenly felt infinitely heavier. A switch flipped inside him. It wasn't a wave of courage or a surge of heroism. It was a cold, quiet, and terrifying certainty. He had no choice. He pushed open the pantry door and walked directly to Mr. Dubois' office. The manager looked up, startled, as Michael began untying his apron. "I have to leave," Michael said, his voice flat and steady. He didn't offer an explanation. "Harlow, what's going on? You can't just walk out in the middle of a dinner rush. Watch me," Michael said. He dropped the apron on the floor and walked out, ignoring the manager's sputtering protests. He didn't wait for the bus. He strode out to the curb and hailed a taxi, an extravagance he hadn't allowed himself in 5 years. As the cab sped through the city, the meter clicking away money he didn't have, he didn't care. For the first time in a long time, he wasn't running away from something. He was running toward it. He found Evelyn in the hospital hallway, right outside the pediatric cardiac wing. She was standing by the window, staring out at the darkness, her shoulders slumped in defeat. The powerful CEO was gone. She just looked like a tired, heartbroken mom. She didn't seem surprised to see him. It was as if she'd been waiting. "Your manager called," she said, her voice hollow. "He said you walked out." "I'm not here about the job," Michael said, stopping a few feet from her. "I'm here about your daughter." Evelyn turned to face him, her eyes searching his, wary of another false dawn. "You said no." "I was wrong," he admitted, the words costing him more than he could have imagined. "I was a coward. You were right. But I need you to understand something. If I do this, it's not for your money, it's not to clear my name, and it's not for you." He took a deep breath. "It's for her, because she deserves a chance, and because I have a daughter too, and I need to be a man she can be proud of, not one who hides." He laid out his terms, his voice gaining a strength he hadn't felt in years. "I won't promise you a miracle. I won't promise you anything except that I will look at her files. I will look at everything, and I will tell you, honestly, if there is anything, even a 1 in a million chance, that can be done. That's all I can offer." A wave of relief so profound it seemed to physically weaken her washed over Evelyn. She leaned back against the wall for support, her eyes shining with tears. "Thank you," she whispered, the words choked with emotion. "That's all I've ever asked for." She straightened up, a flicker of her usual command returning. "Anything you need, it's yours. My company's biomedical labs are data processing supercomputers, access to any specialist in the world. Just tell me what to do." She hesitated for a moment, then her expression softened with a new, dawning understanding. "My team has been busy since last night," she said quietly. "I know about Mia. I know about her condition. Hypoplastic left heart syndrome. I know about the experimental Norwich procedure being trialed at St. Jude. And I know you can't get her in." She took a step closer, her voice dropping, making a solemn vow. "So here is my promise to you, Michael. Parent to parent. You give my daughter your time, your brilliance. You just try. And I will get Mia into that program. I don't care if I have to buy the entire hospital. I will fund a new research wing in her name. Your daughter will get her chance. No matter what happens with Grace." Michael stared at her, overwhelmed. She was offering him the one thing in the world he couldn't give his own daughter: a future. The fates of their 2 children were now intertwined. A fragile, desperate pact between 2 parents who had been brought together by a cruel joke. "Okay," he breathed, the word a surrender and a beginning. Evelyn nodded, her face a mixture of gratitude and sorrow. She led him to the large glass window of Grace's room. Inside, the little girl was propped up in bed, a pair of headphones on, her fingers still flying across the pages of her sketchbook. She looked small and impossibly vulnerable against the stark white of the hospital sheets. Michael looked at the girl who thought he was magic, and then at the bank of monitors beside her, at the jagged, struggling lines that told the story of her failing heart. The weight of it all settled onto his shoulders, heavier than any failure, more terrifying than any ghost. He was no longer a waiter. He was no longer a ghost. He was a doctor again, and this was the most important case of his life. He turned to Evelyn, his jaw set with a grim, terrifying resolve. "Show me the files." They gave him a conference room on the hospital's executive floor. For the next 8 hours, the world outside ceased to exist. The room was a cocoon of silent, focused intensity, illuminated only by the glow of 3 massive display screens showing Grace's life in stark black and white. MRIs, angiograms, cardiac catheterization videos, a complete, heartbreaking map of his daughter's flawed heart. Evelyn sat in a chair in the corner, a silent observer, watching the transformation. The hesitant, haunted waiter was gone. In his place was a man possessed by a fierce, intellectual fire. Michael moved between the screens, his gestures sharp and precise, the 5 years of rust burning away with every image he analyzed. He was a master craftsman studying a problem no one else could solve. "Okay," he said, breaking the long silence. He pointed to a swirling, chaotic image from an angiogram, a video showing dye moving through Grace's heart. "Look here." He traced a path on the screen with his finger. "This is the aorta. It should be a wide, smooth highway for the blood to exit the heart. But Grace's, see this sharp, narrow turn? That's the corktation. It's like a severe kink in a garden hose." He switched to another image, a cross-section of the heart muscle. "Now, because of that kink, the pressure builds up behind it. The heart is working overtime, trying to force blood through that tiny opening. All that force, all that turbulence, has caused this." He pointed to a thick, shadowy mass just below a valve. "That's the stenosis. It's a wall of stiff, fibrous tissue, a clog right at the pump. The heart is essentially strangling itself." He looked at Evelyn, his eyes filled with a grim understanding. "The surgeons who said it's inoperable were right, from a conventional standpoint. Trying to repair the kink could dislodge a piece of the clog, causing a stroke. Trying to surgically remove the clog could rupture the weakened aorta. It's a biological checkmate. Every move is a losing one." Evelyn felt a familiar wave of despair. "So, there's nothing." "I didn't say that," Michael said, a new energy in his voice. He turned to his laptop, where Evelyn's team had uploaded a series of old, forgotten files from his past research. He brought up a series of 3D models and complex equations. "This was my theory," he said, his voice filled with the passion he had suppressed for half a decade. "What if you don't touch the damaged highway at all? What if you build a new one?" He manipulated the model on the screen, showing a translucent, flexible tube being inserted. "This is a custom-designed aortic graft. It's made from a biocompatible polymer mesh that your daughter's own cells would grow over, making it part of her. It would be inserted via catheter, through the femoral artery in her leg, and threaded all the way up into her heart." He traced its path on the screen. It would be deployed before the clog, navigate around it, and then open up after the kink, creating a brand new, unrestricted channel for the blood to flow through. A bypass. We're not fixing the old, damaged road. We're giving the traffic a brand new superhighway. For the first time in months, Evelyn felt a spark of genuine, logical hope. "My God," she breathed. "Can it be done?" Michael's expression sobered. "This is the hard part. Navigating the graft is like trying to thread a needle in the middle of an earthquake. The heart is constantly moving. One wrong move, 1 millimeter of error, and you could tear the ventricle wall or damage a valve. The procedure has at least a dozen points of catastrophic failure. That's why the review board at my old hospital shut it down. They called it reckless. Science fiction. You're the only one who can do it," Evelyn said, her voice a statement of absolute faith. "I'm the only one who has ever thought of it," he corrected her grimly. Whether I can do it or not is another question entirely. While Michael was rediscovering his purpose, Lachlan Reed was discovering his weapon. He sat in his office, a file open on his desk, a triumphant smile on his face. His investigator, Peterson, stood before him. "You were right, Mr. Reed," Peterson said. "Harlow's fall from grace wasn't just bad luck. He was pushed. A man named Dr. Owen Kessler was his chief rival in the pediatric department. Kessler published a groundbreaking paper, got a huge grant, and was promoted. Turns out, a significant portion of the preliminary data for that paper was stolen directly from Harlow's research. Kessler got caught in a lie by a review board and threw Harlow under the bus, fabricating an entire narrative of negligence and fraud. It was masterful. Harlow, distracted by his wife's illness, never stood a chance. Lachlan's smile widened. This was better than he could have imagined. "And where is this Dr. Kessler now?" Peterson's expression was pure satisfaction. "That's the beautiful part. 3 years ago, he was appointed as the head of the Surgical Review Committee at University Hospital. Lachlan leaned back, savoring the perfect cruel irony. "So, you're telling me that for our waiter to even think about performing some miracle surgery, he'd need the express, unanimous approval of the one man on earth who has the most to lose if he succeeds?" Peterson finished. Lachlan let out a low, satisfied laugh. He picked up his phone. He had a new friend to make. Dr. Kessler, he suspected, would be very interested to hear that the ghost of Michael Harlow was back. Back in the conference room, Michael had made his decision. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was overshadowed by the fierce clarity of the problem in front of him. He knew the path. "It's a long shot," he said to Evelyn, his eyes fixed on the image of Grace's heart. "But it's the only shot. I need access to a simulation lab. One of your company's labs. I need to start running fluid dynamics models. I need to build a prototype of the graft and a custom delivery system. I need to practice the procedure 1,000 times before I ever get near your daughter." "Done," Evelyn said without hesitation. "You'll have it by morning." He nodded, a grim determination settling over him. He had the plan. He had the resources. He had the will. He felt, for the first time in 5 years, like he might actually be able to win. He had no idea that the game was already rigged against him. The biomedical simulation lab at Ellington Industries was a world of quiet, focused power. It was less a workshop and more a temple to future science, filled with holographic displays, silent supercomputers, and 3D bioprinters. For Michael Harlow, it was the home he had forgotten he'd had. He worked with a feverish intensity, shedding the last 5 years of his life like a snakeskin. He moved with a purpose that left the small, elite team of engineers Evelyn had assigned to him in awe. He wasn't just their director, he was a force of nature. He and the team spent 3 days running relentless simulations, testing fluid dynamics, and refining the custom graft. He barely slept, fueled by black coffee and the image of Grace's smiling face from the photo. Evelyn was a constant, quiet presence. She wasn't the CEO in here. She was the project manager, the quartermaster, the chief morale officer. She made sure the coffee was always fresh, that the data he needed was instantly available, and that no corporate bureaucracy ever pierced the bubble of their vital work. In those long, quiet hours of the night, surrounded by the hum of machinery, they started to talk. She told him about Grace's love for the stars, about her fierce intellect and her quiet bravery. He, in turn, told her about Mia, about her infectious giggle and her unwavering belief that her dad could fix anything. They weren't a CEO and a waiter anymore. They were just 2 single parents, clinging to a fragile sliver of hope in the dark. On the 4th day, Evelyn had an idea. "Grace is feeling a little stronger this morning," she said, her tone casual, but her eyes were full of intent. "And Mia doesn't have school today. I was thinking, maybe they'd like to meet." A few hours later, Michael stood awkwardly in the doorway of Grace's hospital suite. Mia clutched his hand, her eyes wide as she took in the fancy room. Grace was propped up in bed, a book lying open on her lap. She looked pale, but her eyes were bright and curious. "Hi," Mia said, her voice a small, shy whisper. "Hi," Grace replied, her own voice soft. "Your dad is the magic man." Mia beamed with pride. "I know. He can fix anything." Michael felt a familiar pang of guilt, but Evelyn gently nudged him forward. The two girls started talking, first about their favorite colors and animals, then about more serious things. Mia, with the simple, unburdened honesty of a 7-year-old, pointed to the IV pole next to Grace's bed. "Does your chest hurt sometimes?" Mia asked. "Mine does. It feels like a butterfly is trapped inside, and it's trying to get out." Grace's eyes widened in recognition. "Yes, that's what it feels like. The doctors always ask me to rate the pain on a scale of 1 to 10, but they don't understand the butterfly." In that moment, a bond was forged between them, a bond of shared experience that no adult could ever fully comprehend. Michael and Evelyn watched from the corner of the room, their hearts full. They were fighting for two different children, but they were fighting the same war against the same enemy, a world of flawed biology and finite time. The meeting strengthened Michael's resolve into something unbreakable. While a fragile friendship was blooming in the hospital, a toxic alliance was being cemented in a dark, wood-paneled office downtown. Dr. Owen Kessler, the head of the Surgical Review Committee, nervously adjusted his tie. He was a man who had built his career on a lie, and he had spent the last 5 years terrified of the truth ever coming to light. Across the desk, Lachlan Reed smiled, his expression devoid of all warmth. "He's back, Owen," Lachlan said, his voice smooth and dangerous. "Michael Harlow, and he's working with the full backing of Evelyn Ellington. He's planning to propose some radical, experimental surgery for her daughter." Kessler paled, his hand trembling slightly. "That's impossible." His license was suspended. "He's a pariah." "Money makes anything possible," Lachlan countered. "Think about it. If, by some miracle, he succeeds, he'll be a hero. The first question everyone will ask is why a surgeon of his caliber was waiting tables. There will be an inquiry. They'll look back at your research, at the data you borrowed. Your entire career, your reputation, it will all go up in flames." Kessler started to sweat. There was no proof. It was his word against mine, and now he has Evelyn Ellington's word on his side, and her army of lawyers, Lachlan said, letting the threat hang in the air. He leaned forward, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "But you are in the perfect position to stop this before it ever begins. He has to submit his proposal to your committee. You're the gatekeeper. Deny it. Call it reckless, a danger to the patient. Use the same language the old board used 5 years ago. Bury his proposal in red tape and safety concerns. I will support your decision from my position on the board. We can end this right now. He'll be a discredited fraud, and Evelyn will be seen as an unstable, emotional leader who put her faith in a disgraced surgeon. The board will be forced to act." It was a perfect trap, and Kessler, motivated by pure craven self-preservation, walked right into it. "I'll do it," he said, his voice a hoarse whisper. Back in the lab, on the evening of the 7th day, Michael finally had his breakthrough. After running thousands of simulations, he had perfected it. A seamless, 3-dimensional model of the graft, and a unique, micro-motor-driven delivery catheter that could navigate the treacherous landscape of the heart with unparalleled precision. In the final simulation, the virtual graft deployed perfectly, bypassing the blockages and restoring full, healthy blood flow. The computer model of Grace's heart on the screen turned from a chaotic mess of red and blue to a steady, powerful, rhythmic green. He had done it. The theory was sound. The path was clear. He turned to Evelyn, who had been watching over his shoulder, her hands pressed to her mouth. He was exhausted, his eyes bloodshot, but he was smiling. A real, genuine smile. "It's ready," he said, his voice filled with a confidence he hadn't felt in years. "I'm ready." We can submit the proposal to the hospital's review committee tomorrow morning." It was a moment of pure, unadulterated triumph. At that exact moment, across town, an email notification pinged on Dr. Owen Kessler's computer. He clicked it open. It was the official submission from Ellington Biomedical. Proposal for emergency application of a novel aortic bypass graft procedure. He stared at the applicant's name, Dr. Michael Harlow. His face hardened into a mask of cold resolve. He picked up his desk phone and dialed Lachlan Reed's private number. "I have it," he said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "The fight is here." The hospital boardroom was designed to be intimidating. It was a cold, sterile space with a long, polished granite table that felt like a slab in a morgue. At the head of it sat Dr. Owen Kessler, his face a mask of detached professionalism. Flanking him were the other 4 members of the Surgical Review Committee, a tribunal of gray-haired, stern-faced surgeons who looked upon Michael as if he were a particularly unpleasant microbe under a microscope. On one side of the table sat Michael and Evelyn. On the other, looking entirely too comfortable, was Lachlan Reed, attending in his official capacity as a member of the hospital's board of trustees. The air was thick with unspoken history and a tension so sharp it was almost visible. Michael began his presentation. He was calm, his voice even and clear, the years of doubt and fear burned away by the sheer, focused purpose of his mission. He didn't use overly technical language. He used the analogies he had practiced with Evelyn, explaining the kinked hose of the corktation and the clog at the pump of the stenosis. He walked them through the 3D simulations, showing the elegant, undeniable logic of his proposed bypass graft. He presented the data, the successful trials on bioprinted models, the fluid dynamics. He wasn't a disgraced waiter asking for a favor. He was a brilliant surgeon presenting a solution. When he finished, the room was silent. A few of the committee members looked intrigued, impressed despite themselves, but Kessler's expression was one of bored disdain. "Thank you for that presentation, Mr. Harlow," Kessler began, deliberately using Mr. instead of Doctor. "While the animations are certainly compelling, this committee deals in facts, not science fiction. You are proposing a radically invasive, completely untested procedure on a child. A procedure you yourself admit has, and I quote, 12 points of catastrophic failure." He looked around at his colleagues. "This is reckless. It's a gamble of the highest order. And it is being proposed by a man who has not set foot in an operating room in 5 years. A man whose medical license was suspended for gross negligence and a pattern of dangerous, ill-conceived shortcuts. The words were a direct assault, designed to poison the well." Michael felt a familiar, hot shame rise in his chest, but he kept his composure. "My license was provisionally reinstated by the state board this morning, pending this review, a fact you have in the file in front of you, Dr. Kessler. And my time away from the operating room has not diminished my knowledge of this specific, unique pathology. Hasn't it?" Lachlan Reed interjected, his voice oozing false sincerity. He slid a sleek leather-bound folder to the center of the table. "As a member of the hospital's board, I feel it is my duty to ensure this committee has all the relevant information. I took the liberty of compiling Mr. Harlow's case history from his previous tenure here. It makes for troubling reading." He opened the folder. "A history of ignoring protocols, of clashing with colleagues, and, of course, the final incident. The falsified data the patient put at risk." "I'm sorry, Evelyn," he said, turning to her with a look of pity. "I know you are desperate. But we cannot, in good conscience, allow a man with this kind of history to experiment on your daughter." It was the kill shot. The committee members began murmuring among themselves, their earlier interest replaced by alarm. Kessler leaned back in his chair, a look of triumph in his eyes. They had him. The past had finally caught up and throttled the future. Michael sat frozen, the old lie strangling him, as potent now as it was 5 years ago. But then Evelyn stood up, Her movement was calm, deliberate. All eyes turned to her. "You are right, Lachlan," she said, her voice quiet but carrying to every corner of the room. "It is important to look at a person's history, to see their true character, which is why I also brought something for the committee to review today." She nodded to her assistant, who was standing by a large monitor on the wall. "This is security footage from the Empyrean Club, from the night of my company's dinner 2 weeks ago." The monitor flickered to life. The silent, high-definition footage of the dining room appeared. The committee watched as Michael approached the table. They saw the scene play out with stark, undeniable clarity. They saw Lachlan Reed's cruel smirk. They saw his foot slide out. They saw Michael stumble and fall. They saw the wine spill. A collective, sharp intake of breath went through the room. The murmuring stopped. Lachlan's face went white as a sheet. His carefully constructed image as a concerned, responsible board member evaporated in a single, silent, 3-second clip. He was exposed for what he was, a petty, malicious bully. Evelyn let the image of Lachlan's sneering face hang on the screen for a long, punishing moment before she spoke again. "This has never been about my daughter's safety," she said, her voice ringing with cold fury as she looked from Lachlan to Kessler. "This has been about a personal vendetta, one man's pathetic attempt to humiliate an employee, and another man's terrified effort to protect his own fraudulent career." She looked directly at Kessler. "A career, I might add, that was built on Dr. Harlow's stolen research. I wonder what a full internal inquiry into that will uncover." Kessler looked like he was about to be sick. The other surgeons on the committee stared at him, their expressions a mixture of shock and dawning disgust. The entire conspiracy had been laid bare in the sterile light of the boardroom. The oldest surgeon on the panel, a man named Dr. Miles, cleared his throat, his eyes fixed on Michael. He ignored Kessler and Lachlan completely. "Dr. Harlow," he said, the title a deliberate mark of respect, "your data is sound. Your theory, while radical, is the only viable option this child has left, given the extraordinary circumstances that have been brought to light." He looked around at the other stunned committee members, who nodded in agreement. He turned back to Michael. "The committee grants a one-time, emergency provisional approval for you to perform the procedure. The hospital will provide you with whatever you need." The words felt like a physical impact, knocking the wind out of Michael. He had won. The path was clear. He and Evelyn shared a look across the table, a look of profound, shared, and terrified relief. As security guards quietly entered the room to escort a sputtering Lachlan Reed from the building, and as Dr. Kessler sat frozen in his chair with his head in his hands, Michael felt the full, crushing weight of his victory. He had fought the ghosts of his past and won. Now, he just had to perform a miracle. The 24 hours leading up to the surgery were a blur of intense preparation. Michael and his new team, a group of brilliant young surgeons and engineers hand-picked by Evelyn for their skill and loyalty, lived in the simulation lab. They ran the procedure on the 3D printed heart model dozens of times, refining every movement, mapping every possible contingency, until the entire operation was a seamless, synchronized ballet of actions. On the morning of the surgery, a quiet, almost reverent calm had settled over the team. The operating room was cold, bright, and filled with the quiet hum of advanced technology. Michael stood at the scrub sink, the hot water running over his hands, washing away the last 5 years. When he looked up at his reflection in the mirror, he didn't see the tired, haunted waiter anymore. He saw a surgeon. The man he thought had died was staring back at him, his eyes clear and focused. Evelyn was waiting for him in the sterile corridor just outside the OR. She looked small and fragile in a set of pale blue scrubs, her face pale with a fear that no amount of wealth or power could erase. "Michael," she whispered, her voice tight with emotion. He stopped in front of her. There was nothing left to say. They had said it all in the long nights in the lab, in the shared cups of coffee, in the silent, mutual understanding of two parents at the edge of a cliff. "I'll bring her back to you," he said, his voice a low, steady promise, It was the only thing she needed to hear. She nodded, pressing a hand to her mouth as tears welled in her eyes. I know. He walked into the operating room, and the world narrowed. There was only the team, the machines, and the small, still form of Grace Ellington on the table, draped in sterile blue sheets. The steady, rhythmic beep of her heart monitor was the only sound, a fragile metronome counting down the most important moments of her life. Michael took his place at the head of the table, looking at the faces of his team. Let's begin, he said. The first hour was a masterpiece of precision. Michael expertly inserted the custom catheter into the femoral artery, his movements economical and sure. On the massive 3D angiogram screen that hovered over the table, the team watched the tiny, glowing tip of the device begin its long journey toward Grace's heart. Advancing past the iliac bifurcation, Michael said, his eyes flicking between the screen and the patient's vitals. Vitals are stable. They navigated the complex branching highways of her vascular system with painstaking care. It was a journey of millimeters, each one fraught with peril. As they approached the heart, the tension in the room became a palpable force. They were entering the kill zone. Suddenly, just as they were preparing to cross the aortic arch, a shrill alarm cut through the silence. "Arrhythmia!" the anesthesiologist called out, his voice sharp. "Her heart rhythm is going haywire. BP is dropping fast." On the monitor, Grace's steady beep became a frantic, chaotic scramble. The team froze, their eyes darting to Michael. This was the first point of catastrophic failure. The tip of the catheter, simply by its presence, was irritating the already stressed heart muscle. Michael didn't flinch. His voice was a calm, commanding anchor in the rising storm of panic. "Hold the advance. Administer 20 milligrams of esmolol. Slow push. Let's calm it down." He watched the monitor, his expression unreadable. For a tense, agonizing 10 seconds, the chaotic line continued its deadly dance. And then, slowly, miraculously, the rhythm began to stabilize. The frantic scramble smoothed out, and the shrill alarm was replaced once more by the steady, rhythmic beep. A collective, silent sigh of relief went through the room. They had stepped to the edge of the abyss, and Michael had pulled them back. "Okay," he said, as if nothing had happened. "Let's proceed. We're going in." The next phase was the most dangerous. He had to navigate the graft past the deadly clog of the stenosis without touching it, and deploy it in the impossibly narrow space of the kinked artery. On the screen, they watched the ghost-like tube inch its way forward. The silence in the room was absolute, so total that Michael could hear the soft whisper of the ventilation system. 1 millimeter at a time. The world held its breath. "We're in position," he announced, his eyes locked on the screen. "Deploying the graft." With a soft click from the control mechanism in his hand, the polymer mesh began to unfurl, a delicate, life-saving flower blooming in the heart of the storm. It expanded, pressing against the walls of the aorta, creating a perfect, smooth, new tunnel. "Graft is deployed," he said, his voice tight, retracting the catheter. He slowly, carefully, pulled the delivery system back out, its long journey in reverse. The surgery was, technically, over, but the verdict was not yet in. Had it worked? Every single person in the room stared at the main blood flow monitor. For a long, heart-stopping moment, the image remained the same. A chaotic, turbulent swirl of red and blue. And then, as the heart gave a powerful, unimpeded beat, the image transformed. The chaos vanished, replaced by a smooth, powerful, coherent river of bright, oxygenated blood, flowing effortlessly through the new channel. "We have laminar flow," one of the younger surgeons whispered, his voice filled with pure, unadulterated awe. "Blood pressure is normalizing," the anesthesiologist said, his voice cracking with emotion. "Sats are rising. She's stable. My God, Michael, she's stable." It was done. Michael stepped back from the table, the strength seeming to drain out of him all at once. He leaned against a counter, his legs trembling. He pulled down his surgical mask, taking a deep, shuddering breath of the cold, sterile air. He looked up toward the small, square window in the operating room door. Evelyn was on the other side, her hands pressed flat against the glass, her face a mess of tears and relief. Their eyes met through the window. He gave her a single, exhausted, triumphant nod. He had brought her daughter back. The days that followed the surgery were a slow, beautiful dawn. Grace's recovery was nothing short of miraculous. The first time the nurses helped her walk the length of the hospital corridor, she didn't get winded. She cried, not from pain, but from the strange, wonderful feeling of taking a full, deep breath without a fight. The butterfly in her chest had finally been set free. Michael was a frequent visitor to her room, but he never wore his doctor's coat. He came as a friend. He would sit by her bed and they would talk for hours about nebulas and exoplanets. He saw the life and color returning to her face, the pale, blue tint receding from her lips, replaced by a healthy, vibrant pink. He was witnessing his theory, his last-ditch hope, made real in the bright, curious eyes of a child who was now planning her future. Evelyn was almost always there. The fierce CEO had softened, the hard edges worn away by waves of gratitude and relief. The dynamic between her and Michael had changed completely. The desperate pact they had made in a dark hallway was now a bond forged in the crucible of fear and triumph. One afternoon, as they stood together watching Grace excitedly explain the concept of gravitational lensing to a nurse, Evelyn turned to him, her voice thick with an emotion she no longer tried to hide. "How do I ever thank you, Michael?" she asked, her voice a soft whisper. "I offered you a blank check, but what you've given me, it's a debt I can never repay." "You don't owe me anything, Evelyn," he said, looking at her. "We were just two parents trying to save our kids." "About that," she said, a small, genuine smile touching her lips. "I spoke with the board at St. Jude this morning. The first donation for the Mia Harlow Center for Advanced Cardiac Research has been transferred, and Mia's first appointment with the head of their clinical trial program is next Tuesday. My jet will be waiting for you both." Michael stared at her, the sheer scale of her promise made real. He had saved her daughter, and she, in turn, was saving his. It was a perfect, beautiful symmetry. "Evelyn, thank you. It's a beginning," she said softly, her eyes meeting his. And in that quiet moment, in the gentle, steady beeping of the heart monitor that was now a sound of victory, they both knew she wasn't just talking about the hospital wing. 1 year later, the sun was warm on a perfect Saturday afternoon. The backyard of the large, comfortable house was filled with the sound of children's laughter. Grace, now a vibrant, healthy 12-year-old, was chasing a giggling Mia across the lush green grass. There was no sign of the frail, breathless girl from the hospital bed. She was just a girl, running, her dark hair flying behind her. Mia, whose own groundbreaking procedure had been a resounding success, was almost as fast as her new big sister. Her heart was strong, her future bright and full of possibilities that had once been nothing but a painful dream. Michael and Evelyn sat on the porch swing, watching them, their shoulders gently bumping. His arm was draped casually around her, her head resting comfortably on his shoulder. The past year had been one of healing, of building. He was now the celebrated director of the Harlow Center, a world-renowned surgeon who was pioneering techniques that were saving children all over the globe. But his greatest success, he knew, was right here in this backyard. She was still the powerful CEO of a global company, but the woman who had once scheduled her life in 15-minute increments now fiercely protected her weekends. She had learned that the most valuable assets she would ever manage were these quiet, sun-drenched afternoons. "You know," she murmured, lacing her fingers through his, "a year ago, Lachlan Reed did everything in his power to destroy you in front of my entire company." Michael smiled, a relaxed, easy expression that was now his default. He looked at the two girls trying to build a human pyramid on the lawn. He looked at the warm, loving face of the woman beside him. He played along with their favorite game. "And what happened?" he asked, his voice soft. Evelyn turned to him, her eyes shining with a love that was as steady and as powerful as a healthy heart. "He introduced me to my husband," she said. She leaned in, and he met her halfway. Their kiss was soft and sure, filled with the quiet comfort of a love that had been forged in fire and found its peace in the simple, everyday magic of a family. The cruel joke that had started it all had been transformed, through kindness and courage, into a beautiful, life-saving prayer. And it had finally been answered. What a journey that was. It's amazing how a story can change the feeling in a room, isn't it? My hope is that these stories aren't just an escape, but a spark, a reminder of the courage and resilience that lives inside of you, too. If there's one thought or lesson from this that you'll carry with you, I would genuinely love to hear it in the comments below. And I'm always fascinated to see our global family, so feel free to share where you're listening from. If you want to keep finding that spark with us, the subscribe button is right there. We share a new story regularly, each one a testament to the strength of the human spirit. From the bottom of my heart, thank you for being here. In a world full of noise, sharing this quiet moment with you means everything. So, until our paths cross again, be the main character in your own story, and be a kind one.